Are you stuck in a cycle of anxious thoughts that go around and around and around as if you're on a hamster wheel of overwhelm and stress and worry? Why? People ask me, why does my brain do this? And they feel really defective. And I want to tell you why your brain does this. And it's not because you're defective. It's because our brains are wired a certain way, and we're not taught to try to help our brains be more reasonable. We're not taught to look at our thoughts and question them and be like, maybe there's a different way to think about this. So I want to tell you about the 5 reasons that your brain does this, which are super common. And then we're going to talk about something you can do for each one of those 5 things. All right, number 1, humans have a negativity bias. This is so well proven in research. Our brains like to go to the negative. Now, I think this is very helpful in some ways for survival and probably was very helpful for our species very early on. It's kind of second nature to worry about whatever the problem is so we can fix it, right? But we end up having this kind of survival level intensity about these feelings, which isn't always applicable to what's happening today. But there is something you can do about it. Number 2 is what I was just leading to, your survival focus, right? Our brains are focused on how do we survive. Any threat to my survival? That's all I'm going to think about. Unfortunately, in today's world, for most of us, we're not in immediate physical danger, but our brain wants to think we are. So it keeps that focus as if we're in immediate danger. This generates adrenaline. It gives you narrow tunnel vision, right? Which is needed if you're running away from something dangerous. But it's not needed if you're trying to do your work or talk to your partner. So this also contributes to your mind wanting to stay focused on that problem over and over and over and over again, even though there is a small part of your brain that says, I really don't need to be thinking about this now. Again, I'm going to give you a tip to address that one a little bit later. Number 3 thing your brain does, it projects into the future. This is a wonderful capacity that we have as humans. It's one reason our species has been so successful on this planet. We can sort of look into the future. We can be like, okay, there's all these different options that might happen. I can see different scenarios. I can make choices. I can make plans. I can move towards things. The ability to project into the future can be a super positive. The problem is when it's combined with the survival focus and the negativity bias and the other things I'm going to talk about next, when it's combined with that stuff, our projections tend to be focused on disaster scenarios, which leads me to number 4 thing that your brain loves, a story. All human brains, for whatever reason, they have this research that shows where a brain lights up with different things now. And stories, people love them. And how often are you happy watching a story that's kind of boring? Like, okay, you're watching a story and it's somebody who lives a fine life and is pretty happy and nothing is really happening and they tootle in their garden and then, they might go to a little job and then they might stay up and watch TV and they go to sleep and then the next day it's the same thing. How long are you going to watch that movie? You're not, right? People are going to watch the movie where it's like, oh no, the guy's wife left him and he's losing his job and everything is terrible and all these disasters are happening and is he going to make it or not? So our brains love this kind of hero's journey. Okay, somebody's faced with a lot of obstacles and they can overcome them, but we're all kind of worried we're not the hero, right? That we're not actually going to be able to overcome it. So those stories in your head follow these principles. Those stories, they're not going to be happy if you're just like, oh, today's a good day. Yeah, it's fine, right? No, that story, it's going to try to keep your attention. So it's going to be going through disaster scenarios. Okay, number 5. This brings in a little bit of neuroscience and how your brain works. But believe me, I can walk you through this and it will make sense. But our brains have pathways that end up being like highways. And if we connect the same thoughts, feelings, and behaviors over and over and over, those pathways become like super highways. So you've probably heard the word neuron. All neuron means is a brain cell, and they're brain cells that send and receive signals. Those signals can be electrical impulses and they can be chemical. You've probably heard the word neurotransmitter. Those are chemical signals that our brain cells send to each other. And actually sensory stimuli that we feel, right, like sensory stimuli that comes in, that gets turned into an electrical impulse impulse in the brain, and that activates certain things. The term action potentials is used in terms of those electrical impulses. All right, so I'm sharing that not because you really need to grasp all of that. I think there's some people watching this who might be like, oh, Barbara, you're not even talking about it right, because they know it, but most of us don't. So I think that's enough to really understand that our brain is made up of cells that talk to one another, and some cells get really used to talking to other cells, and patterns develop. And these pathways between our cells, right, they actually become what's called myelinated, where a sheath, some kind of fatty material, actually covers those cells and allows them to transmit information 100 times faster than without the myelination. And that myelination only forms if you're going over and over the same patterns, if the same neurons are speaking with one another. So if you are worrying about X all the time, any reminder of X, any stimulus that you receive that reminds you of X, anything that happens, whoosh, you're going to go right there. You're not even going to have any control. So we have to begin to change those patterns. And again, I don't know, you can let me know if you think this was too technical or not, or maybe it wasn't technical enough. But I think it's important to know this because our behavior is tied into all of that. Our neurons are also giving signals to our muscles and other impulses in the body that connect to behaviors, and behaviors feed back information through other neurons. So what we are actually doing is, I think, the most powerful thing causing these superhighways. So in one of my other videos, I talk about OCD and the exposure therapy and changing the OCD cycle and why that's so important, right? And the exposure element that's important for many types of therapy, many types of conditions, including PTSD, including phobias, right? Exposure is key because that is changing the behavior. You're completely changing the superhighway when you change your behavior. All right, so we've gone through the 5 things about your brain that cause this kind of obsessive thinking and worry. I'm going to give you an exercise for each one of these things. And again here, like, this is not magic. This is not going to work overnight. This takes practice. It takes effort, but you can change these things. So number 1 was the negativity bias. I encourage people in my coaching programs to engage in a practice at least 5 minutes every day where you allow yourself to focus on something positive. If you can do this multiple times a day, it's even better. And it can be super simple. It could be, wow, I really love this tea, so I'm going to take some extra time and breathe it in and enjoy it and feel it and let myself feel that pleasure. If you have kids who likely drive you nuts most of the time, they generally smell great, right? Take a few minutes to breathe them in. Same thing being outside. Now you might say, oh, I do this. I do. I enjoy my tea. I enjoy my kids. I enjoy this. I enjoy that. But how much focus are you giving it? Your brain wants to focus on the negatives. We have to really make an effort to have our brain not just focus on those positives, but as I said, kind of breathe them in. So number 2 is the survival focus. Here is where you will have to begin to strengthen the frontal lobe insight into that survival response. Talking to yourself, letting yourself know you are not in physical danger. You don't need all these chemicals. You don't have to fight, flee, or freeze. And usually it takes some kind of behavior to communicate to that very old part of the brain that controls the fight, flight, freeze response. That part of the brain doesn't really respond that well to language, but it responds well to calming behaviors. Petting a dog. And let's say you don't have a dog, but you used to when you were a kid and you loved the dog. So it makes you sad to think about the dog. Instead of thinking about being sad, thinking about the dog, picture yourself petting the dog. Like, really bring that memory back. Feel it. If you have a puppy or a cat or whatever, get down on the floor, pet it, feel it, and let your body physically relax. So the third thing I mentioned about your brain is that it has this tool to project into the future. I'd like you to label your projections as projections. Label them. My brain is now making up a story about the future. That is what your brain's doing. My brain is making up a story. My brain is projecting. This is not actually happening. this is a projection. That kind of labeling is something that begins to give us distance from our thoughts. And again, this isn't immediate. It isn't going to work perfectly the first time. Practice it regularly, and you'll begin to have some more distance from those thoughts that are going around and around. And that brings us to the fourth one, which is that your brain loves a story. So an exercise for you is to write down your current worry. Write the story, whatever it is. My boss is mad at me. He's going to fire me. She's going to fire me. I'm going to be homeless. My partner will leave me. I'll be miserable the rest of my life. Write whatever your story is, the negative worry. Now, can you write a different story? Start with the same problem. I'm sitting here worried today that my boss is going to fire me, but let's give the story a different ending. Let's give it a happy ending. I want you to write that story out. So if you finish this video, come back to this piece. If you want, pause it as you write. But I really, really want you to write out the story. Write out the one that goes around and around in your head. Write out the positive one. And now let's write out a boring one. My boss never really likes me, and I never really like my job, but I'm okay. My partner doesn't like to hear me complain about my work, but it's okay. Write a boring story, all right? When that story occurs in the future, away from your piece of paper, let's see if you can bring up those other stories and recognize they are all stories. That's all they are. Okay, for point number 5, the superhighway. This is where it's important to know your CBT cycle, your cycle of thoughts, behaviors, feelings, and how it interacts. What is your typical cycle? You have social anxiety, you're worried about saying something dumb at a party, you're worried about what people are going to think about you, so you don't go to the party. So write that cycle out with some detail, and now we have to choose a different path. I'm worried about what people think. I'm going to go to the party anyway. Just do it. If you can begin to question some of your thoughts and beliefs, those are also just stories. I'm going to say something stupid. That's a story. Maybe you don't say anything at all. That's okay. It's all okay, right? But if you can't change the thoughts, very important to change the behavior and practice some of the other things as well. But changing those superhighways is going to require you to change your thoughts, your behaviors, or how you feel. And honestly, changing how you feel is the hardest one, nearly impossible if you don't change how you think or behave. So beginning to figure out what you can change so you can start to create a new, gentler, happier, possibly calmer highway in your brain. So in the next couple of weeks, I am going to come out with a couple of more CBT videos about anxiety. If you're not subscribed, please do subscribe. If you liked this video, please do give me a thumbs up. It's very helpful, very motivating to keep making this material. And I look forward to seeing you next week.